What happens when an entitled duchess meets one of television's most uncompromising hosts? Well, you're about to find out because today we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had everyone talking the moment Meghan Markle was literally kicked off The View after a heated clash with none other than Whoopi Goldberg herself. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how privilege and reality can collide in the most spectacular way possible. Before we get into all the jaw-dropping details, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this whole meltdown. The View studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy when Meghan Markle made her entrance. She swept in wearing a cream-colored designer blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair perfectly styled in those loose waves she's become known for. But something was different about her demeanor today. There was an edge, a tension that seemed to radiate from her as she took her seat at the iconic table. Whoopi Goldberg, veteran of countless controversial interviews and never one to be intimidated by status or titles, watched as Meghan settled into her chair with what could only be described as regal expectation. The Duchess, as she still insisted on being called despite stepping back from royal duties, had come prepared with what seemed like a mental list of topics that were absolutely off-limits. "Welcome to The View." Whoopi began with her characteristic directness. "We're glad to have you here, Meghan. Thank you for having me. Though I do hope we can keep this conversation respectful and focused on my charitable work," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that practiced media tone she'd perfected over the years. Joy Behar, sitting to Whoopi's left, couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the immediate attempt to control the narrative. This was The View, not some carefully orchestrated promotional appearance. The show had built its reputation on asking the tough questions that other programs wouldn't dare touch. "Of course we want to be respectful," Whoopi continued, "but our viewers tune in because we have real conversations here. They want to know about the real you, not just the press release version." Meghan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but Whoopi caught it. She'd been doing this long enough to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate the situation before it even began. "I appreciate that," Meghan said, "but I think it's important that we focus on the positive work I'm doing rather than dwelling on past controversies that have been blown completely out of proportion by the media." The phrase "blown out of proportion" seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, clearly wanting to jump in, but Whoopi held up a subtle hand. This was her show, and she could feel where this was heading. "Meghan, with respect, our viewers are intelligent people. They can handle nuanced conversations about complex topics. That's what we do here," Whoopi explained, her tone still friendly but with an unmistakable firmness underneath. "I understand that," Meghan replied, "but I've been very clear about what I'm comfortable discussing. My team sent over a list of approved topics weeks ago." The mention of a pre-approved topic list seemed to electrify the air in the studio. This wasn't how The View operated, and everyone at the table knew it. The show's strength came from its spontaneous, unscripted discussions, not from carefully choreographed publicity stunts. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, studying Meghan with the kind of look that had made politicians squirm for decades. "Honey, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I can tell you right now that's not how this works. We don't do puppet shows here." "I'm not asking you to do a puppet show," Meghan shot back, her composure starting to crack just slightly. "I'm asking for basic professional courtesy." "Professional courtesy goes both ways," Whoopi replied calmly. "You came on our show, which means you participate in our format. We're not your personal PR team." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Camera operators were getting signals from the control room to keep rolling, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The audience, initially excited to see the Duchess, was now watching what felt more like a chess match than an interview. Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not on television where millions of people could witness her being questioned rather than celebrated. The carefully constructed image she'd spent years building was starting to feel threatened. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about why I'm here," Meghan stated, her voice taking on a cooler tone. "I came to discuss my humanitarian efforts and my upcoming projects, not to be subjected to some kind of interrogation." Whoopi's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. The word interrogation had been poorly chosen, and Meghan was about to learn just how poorly. "Nobody's interrogating you, sweetheart," Whoopi said, her voice carrying that dangerous calm that anyone familiar with the view would recognize as a warning sign. "But if you think asking basic questions about your public statements and actions constitutes an interrogation, then maybe you're not ready for this kind of conversation." The words hit their mark. Meghan's face flushed slightly, and for a moment, the mask of composed professionalism slipped entirely. She'd expected to be treated like the royalty she'd married into, not challenged like any other public figure who'd made controversial statements and decisions. "I don't think I need to justify my life choices to anyone," Meghan replied, her voice rising just enough to be noticeable, "especially not on a show that claims to support women while tearing them down." The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Whoopi's co-hosts exchanged glances, knowing that their colleague had just been directly insulted on her own show. This wasn't going to end well, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Whoopi's eyes narrowed as she processed what had just been said to her. In all her years of hosting, through countless controversial guests and heated debates, very few people had the audacity to sit at her table and accuse her of tearing down women. The silence that followed Meghan's accusation was deafening, and you could practically hear the collective intake of breath from everyone in the studio. "Excuse me," Whoopi said slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "Did you just accuse me of tearing down women on my own show?" Meghan seemed to realize she'd crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubled down with the kind of entitled confidence that only comes from years of having people bend to your will. "I'm saying that some of the questions you're clearly planning to ask seem designed to create drama rather than have a meaningful conversation," Meghan replied, crossing her arms defensively. "I've seen how this show operates." "How this show operates," Whoopi repeated, her voice taking on that tone that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get schooled. "Let me tell you something about how this show operates. We've been supporting women, lifting up women, and giving women a platform to speak their truth for over 25 years. We don't need lessons on supporting women from someone who what?" Meghan interrupted, her voice sharp and challenging. "Go ahead, finish that sentence." The interruption was a mistake. Whoopi Goldberg was many things, but someone you interrupted mid-sentence was not one of them. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees as Whoopi leaned forward in her chair. "From someone who seems to think that supporting women means never asking them tough questions," Whoopi finished, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Supporting women means treating them like the intelligent, capable people they are, not like delicate flowers who can't handle being asked to explain their choices." Meghan's face was flushing now, the composed mask she'd worn into the studio completely gone. "My choices don't need to be explained to anyone. I've been through enough public scrutiny to last several lifetimes." "And yet here you are," Joy Behar interjected, unable to stay quiet any longer, "on a talk show, promoting your projects. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't court public attention when it benefits you and then complain about public scrutiny when it doesn't." "That's exactly the kind of victim-blaming mentality that I've had to deal with," Meghan shot back, turning to face Joy with barely controlled anger. "Just because someone chooses to do charitable work doesn't mean they deserve to have every aspect of their life dissected and criticized." Sunny Hostin, who had been trying to stay neutral, finally spoke up. "Nobody's saying you deserve to be criticized, but you've made very public statements about very serious topics. When you go on international television and make accusations about racism within the royal family." "I'm not discussing that," Meghan cut her off sharply. "That topic is completely off limits, and I made that very clear to your producers." Whoopi had heard enough. She sat back in her chair with the kind of expression that had intimidated everyone from politicians to movie stars. "You know what? Let me make something very clear to you. This is the view. We don't do off-limits here. We don't do pre-approved questions. And we certainly don't let guests dictate what we can and cannot discuss." "Then maybe this was a mistake," Meghan replied, her voice taking on that cold, dismissive tone that had become familiar to anyone who'd followed her public appearances. "Maybe I should have gone to a show that understands professionalism." The insult was unmistakable, and the reaction around the table was immediate. Ana Navarro, who had been quietly observing the escalating tension, let out a small gasp. This wasn't just about difficult questions anymore. This was about respect, and Meghan had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Professionalism, Whoopi repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You want to talk about professionalism? Professional guests don't come on shows and then try to rewrite the rules. Professional guests don't insult their hosts. And professional guests certainly don't act like they're doing us some kind of favor by gracing us with their presence. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent studio. I don't have to sit here and be lectured like some kind of child. Nobody's lecturing you, Whoopi replied, remaining seated but clearly done with the entire situation. We're trying to have a conversation, but you came here expecting a coronation, not an interview. I came here expecting to be treated with the same respect you'd show any other guest, Meghan fired back, her voice rising to a level that was definitely going to require some creative editing if this ever made it to air. We treat all our guests with respect, Joy interjected. But respect doesn't mean we don't ask questions. Respect doesn't mean we pretend controversial statements were never made. And respect certainly doesn't mean we let anyone, no matter who they married, come in here and tell us how to do our jobs. The mention of who they married seemed to hit a particular nerve. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions, settling on something between outrage and disbelief. How dare you reduce me to who I married, she said, her voice shaking slightly with anger. I had a successful career long before I met Harry. I was making my own way in the world. Then act like it, Whoopi said simply. Stop hiding behind titles and protocols and have a real conversation like the successful, independent woman you claim to be. The challenge was clear, and everyone in the studio was waiting to see how Meghan would respond. This was the moment where she could have turned things around, where she could have shown the grace and intelligence that had supposedly attracted a prince. Instead, she chose to escalate. I don't need to prove anything to you or to anyone else in this room, Meghan declared, grabbing her purse from beside her chair. I've accomplished more in my life than most people could dream of, and yet you can't handle a simple question about your public statements, Whoopi observed, her tone now almost conversational, which somehow made it even more cutting. That's interesting. Meghan turned to face Whoopi directly, her eyes flashing with undisguised anger. You know what's interesting? The fact that you claim to support women while sitting here trying to humiliate me on national television. Nobody's trying to humiliate you, Whoopi replied calmly. You're doing that all by yourself. The words landed like a physical blow. Meghan's mouth opened and closed as if she was trying to find a response that would somehow salvage the situation. But the damage was done. She'd come onto The View expecting to be treated like royalty and instead found herself being held accountable like any other public figure. The silence that followed Whoopi's cutting observation stretched for what felt like an eternity. Meghan stood frozen, her purse clutched in her hands, clearly struggling to process that someone had just told her she was humiliating herself. The camera operators were having a field day, capturing every micro-expression as the Duchess's carefully constructed public persona crumbled in real time. You have no idea what I've been through, Meghan finally managed, her voice now carrying a tremor that suggested she was either about to cry or explode with rage. You have no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every word twisted. Actually, honey, I do, Whoopi replied with devastating calm. I've been a black woman in Hollywood for 40 years. I've been criticized, scrutinized, and attacked by people who didn't think I belonged. The difference is, I didn't run away when things got tough. The comparison was brutal in its simplicity, and everyone in the studio could feel its impact. Meghan's face went through a series of colors as she processed being directly compared to someone who had fought real battles in the entertainment industry without the benefit of royal protection or inherited privilege. That's completely different, Meghan sputtered, her composure now completely abandoned. You don't understand the level of harassment I've faced, the racism. That don't. Whoopi cut her off sharply, holding up a hand. Don't you dare try to lecture me about racism. Don't you dare come into my house and try to explain to me what racism looks like. The words hit like a thunderclap. Meghan's mouth fell open as she realized she'd just tried to explain racism to Whoopi Goldberg, a woman who had lived through and fought against it her entire career. The audacity of the moment was so staggering that even the studio audience seemed to collectively gasp. I wasn't trying to lecture anyone, Meghan backtracked desperately. I was just trying to explain my situation. Your situation, Ana Navarro repeated incredulously, is that you married into one of the most privileged families on earth, lived in palaces, and then complained when people expected you to do the job you signed up for. I didn't sign up to be destroyed by the press. Meghan shot back, her voice now reaching a pitch that was definitely going to require some audio adjustment. I didn't sign up to have my mental health attacked. Nobody attacks mental health, Sonny interjected. But when you make public accusations about your family and then refuse to provide any context or evidence, people are going to ask questions. I don't owe anyone evidence, Meghan declared, turning to face the entire panel with wild eyes. I don't owe any of you anything. I came here as a courtesy, and this is how I'm treated? Whoopi had clearly reached her limit. She stood up slowly, her full authority as the show's moderator now on display. When Whoopi Goldberg stood up during a heated exchange, it usually meant the conversation was over. Let me explain something to you, Whoopi began, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. Coming on The View isn't a courtesy. It's not a favor you do for us. It's an opportunity we give you to share your story with our audience. But that opportunity comes with expectations. What expectations? Meghan demanded, her voice dripping with sarcasm. To be ambushed and humiliated? To be honest, Whoopi replied simply. To treat our audience with enough respect to answer their questions. To understand that when you make your living in the public eye, the public gets to have opinions about what you do. Meghan let out a laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. This is exactly why Harry and I left. This is exactly the kind of toxic environment we were trying to escape. Then why are you here? Joy asked pointedly. If we're so toxic, if this environment is so terrible, why did you agree to come on the show? The question hung in the air like a trap that Meghan had walked directly into. Her face went through several expressions as she tried to formulate an answer that wouldn't make her look even worse than she already did. I thought I could have an intelligent conversation about important issues, she finally managed. I was obviously wrong. You were wrong about a lot of things, Whoopi observed, sitting back down with the kind of casual authority that made it clear who was really in control of this situation. You were wrong if you thought you could come here and control the narrative. You were wrong if you thought we'd just nod along with whatever story you wanted to tell. And you were definitely wrong if you thought you could insult us and then play the victim when we called you out. Meghan's eyes were now blazing with undisguised fury. She'd clearly never been spoken to this directly, never had someone refuse to back down when she deployed her usual tactics of deflection and victimhood. I'm not playing anything, she hissed. I'm a real person with real feelings who's been through real trauma, and sitting here being attacked by a bunch of women who should understand what I've been through is just proving every point I've ever made about how toxic this industry is. Nobody's attacking you, Anna said firmly. We're asking you questions. If you can't tell the difference between questions and attacks, that says more about you than it does about us. Fine, Meghan declared, slinging her purse over her shoulder with theatrical force. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be ganged up on by people who clearly have their own agenda. She started to move toward the edge of the set, clearly expecting someone to stop her, to apologize, to beg her to stay. Instead, the panel watched calmly as she made her dramatic exit attempt. You know what? Whoopi called out, causing Meghan to stop and turn back. You're absolutely right. You don't need this. For a moment, Meghan looked triumphant, as if she'd finally gotten through to them. Then Whoopi continued. And we don't need this either. Security will show you out. The words landed like a bomb. Meghan's face went from triumphant to shocked to outraged in the space of seconds. She'd clearly expected her tantrum to result in apologies and accommodation, not ejection. You're kicking me off your show, she said, her voice now carrying a note of disbelief. I'm ending an interview with someone who clearly doesn't want to be here and doesn't respect the format, Whoopi replied calmly. That's not kicking you off. That's just good television. Meghan stood there for a moment, apparently waiting for someone to laugh or admit it was all a joke. When no one did, when the security personnel quietly appeared at the edge of the set, the reality of the situation finally sank in. This is unbelievable, she muttered, but the fight had gone out of her voice. This is absolutely unbelievable. What's unbelievable, Whoopi said as Meghan was gently but firmly escorted away from the set, is that someone could have so many advantages in life and still think everyone else is the problem. As Meghan disappeared from view, still muttering about unfair treatment and toxic environments, Whoopi turned back to the cameras with the kind of expression that had made her a television legend. "Well," she said to the stunned studio audience, "I guess that's what happens when entitlement meets reality." The audience erupted in applause, and even the crew members were trying to hide their smiles. It had been a masterclass in how not to handle a television interview, and everyone who witnessed it knew they'd just seen something that would be talked about for years to come. So there you have it, folks. The moment when Meghan Markle's sense of entitlement finally met someone who wasn't willing to play along. Make sure you subscribe to see more explosive celebrity moments like this one, and let me know in the comments what you think Meghan should have done differently to avoid this complete meltdown.